YouTube? Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. For today's video, I've got a bunch of fun things that I'm going to cover. We're going to start out with a really interesting fact I learned about any of the dealers that charge ADM on a car. We're then going to talk about the Z06 at Road & Track's Performance Car of the Year, PCOTY, as well as at Car and Driver's Lightning Lap competitions. Next, I want to share a really awesome meetup that I did with a subscriber at the E-Ray reservation launch at McMulkin in Nashua. And lastly, but probably the most exciting to me, I've got a big Lemons update. We've got a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. Real quickly, before I get into everything I just mentioned, I wanted to say a quick thank you to you, the viewers and subscribers. Specifically, thank you for the support in the comments and the emails that you send in regards to my thoughts about keeping my C7 Grand Sport and building the garage, and even possibly not getting the C8 Z06. I was pretty nervous about sharing that was even in my mind. I was worried that after over a year of being so hyped for the car, that some might not support the changes in my thoughts over time, or that my life situations might be different and my priorities might have changed, or might think that I was turning my back on the Corvette. It's been incredibly refreshing and invigorating to see how much support there's been and how philosophical many have been, sharing your own stories or garage versus car situations, as well as encouraging me to really just follow my heart. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you for all the support and for being a part of that process for me. Alright, diving right in, let's start off with something very interesting I learned recently regarding ADM, additional dealer markup, and the implications that has to auto manufacturers. It highlights why under no circumstances does a manufacturer like or support ADM, but it also highlights the fine line that they have to walk with regards to their dealerships. I was watching a recent episode of the Smoking Tire podcast, and Matt was talking with Doug DeMuro. An offhand statement caught me off guard though, and it has some pretty interesting implications. The comment specifically is that when a car is returned and has to be bought back by lemon law, the entirety of the purchase price paid by the buyer has to be returned. This includes any ridiculous markup, any tacked on options by the dealer, etc. The entire amount the buyer paid must be paid back to them. The kicker is that it's the manufacturer that has to buy the car back. This isn't your local car dealership paying for the car, it's the manufacturer. Doug goes on to mention that this is one of the reasons that Ferrari cracked down on and now prohibits any Ferrari dealership from marking up their cars, something that I didn't even know about. I did a little looking in on this, and both of those statements are true. This puts an interesting twist in the story of dealerships and ADM, and specifically on the Z06. Not only are they hurting and gouging their customers, but they're also hurting the manufacturer that builds the cars. I've seen numerous Z06 postings online with ridiculous markups, new car prices being flaunted of $200,000, $300,000. Now consider that if the car gets lemon lawed, GM not only has to refund the buyer the cost of the car, and in turn end up owning a car with some serious issues, but potentially, if the markup is big enough, they have to fork over another whole Z06 worth of money because of that dealership. I certainly understand the fine line that GM is trying to walk of not wanting to bite their dealer networks too hard. However, I can imagine that there are going to be some stern words behind closed doors if such a situation actually happens. I thought this was interesting, and I was unaware of this, as was Matt Farah on the video. I'll include a link below to the clip of the conversation so you can hear it directly if you're interested. Now, turning the page a bit, you've all hopefully heard of Road & Track and Car and Driver. See what I did there with that intro? They're two of the most popular car enthusiast publications in the US and are pretty widely respected around the world. Around this time of year, early in the season, both magazines gather all the best cars they can get their hands on for the upcoming model year and do a whole host of tests, comparisons, and driving, and then crown some winners. Road & Track does their famous Performance Car of the Year award, also known as PCOTY, while Car and Driver hosts their Lightning Lap contest. A casual observer may mistake the two of these comparisons as more or less the same thing, and you'd be forgiven for making that mistake. But they are actually quite a bit different under the hood, and highlight different things about the cars, as well as there is some overlap. First, a bit about each of the competitions. We're going to start with Performance Car of the Year. This year's event by Road & Track was held at Monticello out in New York. On its 10th iteration, PCOTY is interesting. Rather than compare all the cars in their lineup against one another solely from a performance and stats perspective, they take a little bit different approach. They start by gathering a whole array of interesting cars aimed at the enthusiast, which are likely to be among the most interesting, fun, and engaging cars of the year as the start of their test. These are a thin slice of the market, at all price levels that you should probably start looking at if you want a new car that's going to be fun to drive. Not all of these cars are going to be blazing fast, and in fact, some, like the newly redesigned WRX, are relatively sedate and slower than the average luxury crossover. But importantly here, each car is here for a reason. Sometimes it's about what they represent, like the dwindling list of cars with a manual option. Others because they're the new track monsters, like the Cayman GT4 RS. And others are here because they represent what the average buyer likely may pick from when they're buying something new that's fun, but also needs to be a little bit practical, like the new Civic Type R. The price range here varies from about $34,000 all the way up to a stratospheric $340,000 of a Lamborghini Huracan Technica. Rest assured, there are a lot of cars that don't make the list and a lot more ways to spend exorbitant amounts of money on the cars. But the cars here are representative of what's new, what's hot, and what an enthusiast at any price point might go for. Road and Track is careful to clarify that they aren't searching for the fastest car, but rather the one that stands out the most, the one that is at home on the track but also on the road. This is perhaps the best intersection of what car people care about, and why lap times are only a part of the equation here. Flipping the coin, we move over for a moment to Car and Driver's Lightning Lap competition, LL for short. Running for its 18th consecutive year, this year, as with most of the years, it was hosted at VIR, Virginia International Raceway. Unlike PCOTY, Lightning Lap is all about lap times, as you might have guessed, and going as fast as possible. However, if you look at the list of the cars that enter, you may wonder if you're objectively comparing lap times and the price for the entry for the competitors spans from a similar $30,000 budget all the way well up into the $300,000 range, how do you ensure apples-to-apples comparison? Isn't the most expensive car going to win? Smartly, Car and Driver has broken up the cars into 5 different classes with a range based on the price. These ranges fluctuate from year to year, but the decade plus that I've been following the event, they seem to be a relatively good way to separate the cars of similar performance buckets. The Z06, as it turns out, is going to turn that on its head. More on that in a minute. Throughout Lightning Lap, it's all about speed and how composed a car is on the track in order to put down the best lap. While many among you may argue that lap times don't make a great car, a fair percentage of the automotive world likes to bench race, no matter how they end up using a car, spitting out facts and figures, and looking for the most bragging rights. Lap times are certainly one way to do that. Before we dive in on the Z06 here, I thought it was important to mention one thing. I think it's no coincidence that these competitions both occur at the same time of the year, right at the start. I also don't think that it's a surprise that many of the cars here appear in both of the events. I think that the real benefit here, though, is that by paying attention to both events, you can get a real picture of each car, and probably a pretty decent sense of all the vehicles in any situation you may find yourself in, shy of actually test driving the cars yourself. Not all of us can afford the latest Lamborghini or Porsche, but it's fun to see how the cars we are familiar with, such as the WRX, stand up to things way up market. For many of us, this year is particularly special for these events because the C8 Z06 enters the fray, and with fairly predictable results, at least if you've been paying any attention. Now that the intros are out of the way, on to the events, and primarily the Z06. I'm not going to summarize everything or cover all the cars. Instead, I'm going to cover the highlights, my observations, and in the description, I'm going to link to both articles so you can read them for yourself. Much of the event is also on YouTube by their respective publications channels too, so definitely go check those out. For PCOTY, the Z06 was in some pretty great company. The latest M4 from BMW, a Lamborghini, and of course one of its contemporary rivals, the Cayman GT4 RS. Road and Track is quick to point out that there was never any doubt, even before the event finished, which car was going to be fastest on the track. The Z06 was the shoo-in, and it delivered. The accolades ran aplenty across the pages, and its penchant for speed did deliver. However, the most interesting observations, I think, were the road manners. Praising the magnetic suspension, strong power delivery, quick but smooth transmission, the Z06 was perhaps even more impressive on the road than it was on the track. Managing to take true world-beating performance and make it livable and fun on the street, it's no surprise that the Z06 won, but it was great to finally see the car pitted against the best that other brands can provide and still come out on top. Balancing this out was the Lightning Lap. Featuring a similar list of cars with a handful of differences, the Lightning Lap this year was perhaps one of the biggest tests for the Z06. In an environment where sheer track prowess mattered most against some of the best cars currently made, the Z06 certainly wasn't going to have a cakewalk. Or was it? Backing up for a second, when you look at the classification of cars for the test, you'll see that the Z06 slots in nicely at LL3, while cars like the Huracan sit in LL4. An important note is that the prices are treated as base price of the car plus performance-enhancing options. So for the Z06 to end up in LL3, which ranges between $75K and $140K, you have a 1LZ with a Z07 package and carbon wheels. The car handily slides in well under that, though the as-tested price was just above the top cutoff for that range. This is the same reason that the Huracan was only in LL4 when the as-tested price was nearly $100,000 more than the base price and $60,000 over the price to get into LL5. For context, LL5 didn't have any contenders this year, but in prior years, cars like the AMG GT Black and the 765 LT made the cut. Now the results, as you may have heard, or as PCOTY alluded to, are somewhat predictable. The Z06 crushed all challengers this year. It was faster, better composed, and ultimately set a lower lap time than any other car. I'm sure most of you could have guessed that. But there is another story here that's perhaps a bit more interesting. This is the fastest naturally aspirated car ever tested in Lightning Lap. And further, it's the 5th fastest lap time set by any car ever at the event. Currently, it's just 0.2 down from the 765 LT mentioned earlier. In fact, looking for the next fastest naturally aspirated car, you have to drop 3 more spots to the Cayman GT4 RS, which was in this year's event, or down another spot to the current GT3 to find a naturally aspirated car. Removing the GT3 engined cars from the lineup, you have to drop 11 more spots to the 16th place in order to find a purely NA car, and that's in the Lamborghini Huracan Technica, which incidentally also was in this year's test. I think what makes this all the more impressive is if you look at the company that the Z06 is keeping, the other cars in this range, most of the other cars, other than a few Porsches, are deep in LL5 territory. Cars that cost more than houses, or were made in exceedingly limited numbers. That the Z06 punched so far up into these ranks on its first go is frankly amazing. The takeaway here, though, is one of impact. A lot of supercar owners scoffed at the idea that a Corvette would ever be able to beat their Lambos, their Ferraris, and their McLarens. Haters and trolls made fun, tried to poke holes in the narrative, and when they couldn't make it stick, they turned to deriding the buying process. Buying process, warts and all, isn't great, but there are ways to get this car for MSRP if you don't mind waiting. And the fact that for an entry price of just over $100K, you can whoop the best that other makers offer is pretty amazing. GM started their Z06 story with a slogan of putting the world on notice. Against all odds, despite all the negativity and criticism, they somehow managed to do it. The Z06 is an instant classic, a game changer, and proof that good minds and engineering can dream up wonderful things when given the support and the budget to do so. Awesome job, Chevy. And looking towards the future, as they say, this is just the beginning. Alright, so turning the page a bit. As you may have heard in my last video, the E-Ray reservation launch happened at McMulkin about 2 weeks ago. On a cold Tuesday, January 24th, a good number of faithful Corvette fans showed up to get their names in for the car. One of my subscribers and frequent commenters, Shane Rick, reached out to say that he was going to attend. If you're active on Horsepower Obsessed channel, you may even know Shane as the thumbs up guy, always being upbeat and full of enthusiasm. I first started interacting with Shane easily over a year ago, first as a commenter on the channel, and then over time we began emailing back and forth. Back when I was doing a viewers ride section, you may remember he was the one working on building a beautiful old 911 resto mod named Eugene for his late father. Shane's the one who coined the term Happy Fred Day in the comments as well, and even got my dad saying Happy Fred Day whenever I call him on a Friday. In short, Shane is a wonderful guy, fun to be around, and his enthusiasm for cars and the Corvettes is contagious. Anyway, he reached out saying he was going to fly in, rent a car, and then camp out in the parking lot at McMulkin so he could get a low reservation number, at MSRP for those wondering. I'll link to Shane's video, which debuted on Horsepower Obsessed channel, in the description, so you can see firsthand what that was like waiting in line. Shane wondered if I was free and might be able to drop by though, or if I was planning on visiting McMulkin for the E-Ray that night. I wasn't planning to, but given the correspondence that we'd had over the last year, there was no way I wanted to miss a chance to meet him. So, we made some plans and I drove over after work. We met up, went to a nice local Mexican restaurant, and spent roughly the next 2 hours talking about cars, driving, the C8, our dream garages, all kinds of things, all while eating some tacos. For me, it was one of those surreal moments in life where you almost want to pinch yourself. Here I am, meeting someone I've never met or talked to before, who likely knows way more about me than I did about him, who lives halfway across the country. Yet, we have a common bond between cars and Corvettes, and immediately it was more like seeing a lost friend or a college roommate. I don't think I've smiled or laughed so much in quite a long time. We parted ways after dinner so he could go settle into his Nissan rental car, and the next morning he was able to get the 24th reservation on the E-Ray. I just wanted to share this as it was incredibly special to meet someone like Shane. I'm sure it's hard to relate unless you run a channel or make videos, but I'm still in disbelief that through making videos about cars, I'm now ending up with real life friends with a shared passion or interest. Shane, it was great to meet you, man, and I definitely look forward to making plans to meet up sometime and go driving once you've got that E-Ray. Lastly, but certainly not least, I wanted to give an update on the 24 Hours of Lemons project. Things are moving along fast, faster than I think any of us expected. Most of my safety gear has showed up now, including the driving suit, the shoes, and some of the parts related to our Hans device. We've now stripped the whole interior of the car down to the frame, removed the windows on the sides, gutted the doors. The car came with a blown fuel pump, so we replaced that, and amazingly, when we did our first test start, the car started immediately. No cranking or anything. We've just gotten our 6 new tires, 2 for spares, Hankook RS4s, and have ordered the subframe reinforcements we need. Next steps are going to be that we're going to use dry ice to remove the sound dampening from the car, then jack it up and remove the rear subframe, differential, and axles. We'll be welding in structural reinforcement to fix a known issue with the E46 chassis. We're also working on lining up the roll cage and are close to having that path figured out. We're also in touch with a well-known Lemons team on the West Coast who are helping guide and advise us as we proceed. It's amazing with 4 engineers and a lot of excitement how fast all of this is going, and how much we're learning. Even 2 weeks ago, I would have been nervous to do much more than an oil change on a car, and already we're about to remove the whole rear end. This is the hands-on experience that all of us have wanted to build, and so far it's been great. Sure, there will be setbacks, and some of the things aren't going to go the way we expect, but we see that as part of the challenge and part of the fun. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, Fred out!